This is TWiT.
Tech Break is brought to you by our friends at IT Pro TV, now called ACI Learning. ACI Learning is here to support your team's advancement in IT and cybersecurity. Get fully customizable training tailored to your team's needs. Visit go.acilearning.com/twit. TWiT listeners can receive up to 65% off an IT Pro Enterprise Solution Plan. The discount is based on the size of your team when you fill out their form. Hello, genial hosts. So, yeah, I watched with interest the Snapdragon thing, because here's the only thing I was really interested in. I knew they would say a lot of AI. They did. Mm-hmm. I knew they would talk about Snapdragon and mobile. They did. That's where Snapdragon, Qualcomm lives.
Did you know they're going to spend so much time on sound chips and
other
nonsense?
I was a little surprised, although Qualcomm did create the aptX.
And actually, codec. I should say, to be fair,
it's quite good.
Fair to them.
Yeah.
We think of them as a kind of a microprocessor company. I mean, that's not really, wasn't the initial point of the company. They make mobile chipsets,
right?
But they started out with CDMA mobile.
Yeah, they started with radios, and in fact,
it was still very big in that.
It was the guy on stage, their CEO, who took them into the new realm of server processors, ARM processors for PCs, phones, and that.
They have a problem though, Leo, and that is that their major non-mobile, what I'll call CPU, it's not really the right term, efforts have all done horribly.
Well, and that's
the
what
PC
really
stuff is done horribly. The IoT stuff is done horribly.
I agree.
The wearable stuff is done horribly. They just announced they're replacing it with RISC-V.
Yeah.
Right, RISC-V, or whatever the term is.
RISC-V, it's an open source ARM implementation, or RISC implementation.
Interesting, right?
So last time, as you may remember from last time, they promised PC-grade performance with their, what was it, the CX chip they did with in conjunction with Microsoft.
One time before the CX chips, they promised Core i5 level performance, to which I replied, which generation? Because this thing,
it's not even close.
Runs like a processor from the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It's not good.
And so anything they say on stage, I'm a little suspect, because they've misled us in the past. But they did show a graph.
Love the article I wrote about this.
A very Apple-y graph with no axes,
right?
No reference points, saying they're 30% faster than the M2.
At what?
At lower power, even.
At what? Doing what?
Oh,
what does that mean?
We couldn't read the fine print, but I think somebody who was at the event said it was with the Geekbench single-threaded Geekbench.
Okay, so let me preface this by saying I was briefed about this ahead of time.
Oh, good.
And I have all the information I have to provide. And I got to tell you, I need to see one of these things in the real world before I get excited about this.
And by the way, it's not going to be for 6 months, is it? I mean, we're talking.
Here's the thing: a lot of their So first of all, they refused to announce reveal who the competitors they were comparing with. Although one of those slides does say against the major ARM-based competitor, which has to be Apple, right? Which I think is where you're getting that information.
They mentioned M2, and they mentioned i7, and they mentioned i9.
Oh, okay. So they actually did this
on the slides.
Show them.
I should mention. And it's interesting because you could see which blogs had the pre-briefing slides and which ones had the slides from the event.
Right. So
they added labels in the event. Yeah.
Everybody complained, and they never changed anything. They were like, "Yep, no, we hear you." And it's like, I am routinely, and I mean monthly, briefed by companies like HP and Lenovo, and I am briefed by companies like AMD and Intel that make chips, and they always identify the competitor that they're, we
know who they're aimed at. I mean, they've got to compete.
Well, we do, but this is where marketing is tough, because remember, this is an ARM-based chip running on Windows.
Right.
So they're in some cases they're comparing themselves to x64 chipsets, and in some cases they're comparing themselves to Apple. Both of those are off a bit because Apple is not running Windows, although I know it can in emulation, and x64 is not ARM. So it's which one are you comparing to?
Right.
When they say we offer X% of performance and double the battery life, they're not talking about M2, but they don't say that.
Right.
And this makes me very nervous. The weird qualification, or not even qualifications, the weird vagueness.
Here was
of each of their claims.
My interest, and I'm sure everybody listening interest, is Are we going to get Windows on ARM running on a performant processor? It doesn't have to be the fastest.
Right.
It doesn't have to even beat M2. It just has to be usable.
Well,
It has to be.
The other angle of this whole thing is ARM in the data center.
Right.
Yeah, but they're not. This is but this thing
We're
right
not-
here.
We're
the
clearly
Lead X
not
is-
there yet, but I think one of the things that we're waiting for these later chipsets that are going to not be Qualcomm
Right.
is ARM in the data center, because it saves cycle.
Yep.
Big time. And we
Well,
already can prove categorically, like the .NET devs build on Windows, deploy to Linux. They'll deploy to ARM if it costs less, like in a second.
Yep. But I mean, okay. I mean, today, yesterday's announcement was very specifically just PC, right? I mean, it is the first of a family, et cetera, et cetera. You're right. I mean, the data center is potentially a bigger market for them.
I think so too. And I think they're doing it in the wrong order. You want to knock the bugs out of this? You want to make it work properly? Make it run in the data center, because you only have a half a dozen customers and they're going to crucify those chips.
So they had.
You will get them wrung out.
They had HP, Lenovo, and the new, Panis Panay's replacement from Microsoft on stage or on video saying, we're so excited. We can't wait to make Windows on ARM
Here's
machines.
the problem. Those companies have all released a small handset of ARM-based PCs already, so there's nothing new there.
Right.
Look, Leo, what Leo said up front is absolutely correct in the PC space. What this thing needs to be is a U-series competitor.
Yes.
Something for thin and light machines. Because if you can have a machine that to the average user is just about as good as any Intel chip, but the thing gets like 20 hours of battery life or 25 hours of battery life, you win, right? Assuming everything else is equal, right? And I do think Windows and ARM is pretty much there.
Don't aim it at the dev and the high-end developer and so forth.
Yes,
aim it at the regular productivity user. Right?
Well, there's a little, as there always has been in this market, and a little Apple envy, and I think that there's always been this kind of thing. We can do Apple silicon quality. And we should also point out that one of the reasons they're confident of this is they bought the company Nuvia that was founded by Apple's former chief chip designer. Apple sued. They eventually dropped their lawsuit because he brought a lot of people over. He was on stage too, Gerard Williams III. And so I think that's why they're kind of saying we're better than Apple silicon. I agree. They don't need to be.
Boy, I don't think they are going to be really.
No,
not overall. Not in V1, but they don't need to be, right?
They don't need to.
This is the thing.
We'd be happy if they just worked well.
Exactly.
But the Surface Pro X is terrible.
Yeah, it's so close. That's the problem. You can see it, and you want. And look, this is an emotion versus logic thing for me. I want this thing to succeed emotionally.
Yeah.
Logically, I know it has not. It's not been there. It just isn't. And I've tested so many of these machines. I've tested every version of the chipsets they've made, often on multiple PCs, and it's gotten closer. I mean, every time, there's no doubt about it. Step forward. The problem is next week Apple might release announce M3 chips, and the world moves on.
Apple gets an event on Monday to top this, right?
Yeah. And by the way, an event that was not on the books until what happened yesterday.
Yeah, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
They were supposed to push that back. And they're like, no, let's just go now. Screw you, Qualcomm.
We got the M3.
Might be the reason it's happening, right?
I don't think they care about Qualcomm, to be honest with you.
Well,
they sued him. Remember, what you said. What you characterized Qualcomm as a ARM for network centers and radios, and a lot of people characterize them as a patent.
A patent troll, yeah.
Troll. I don't want to use the word troll.
It's not. I don't either. That term
as a patent licensing operation, because they invented CDMA, and people have to use their chips or at least license their technologies to make smartphones.
Anyone who believes that's true on one level,
and they've been sued by everybody for charging too much.
Okay, but here, you go find their most recent quarterly earnings and tell me what percentage of the revenues are from patent licensing and how big that business is compared to the rest of the company. And I'll spoil the surprise. It's tiny.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. It's not.
So where do they make most of their money?
Literally on mobile chipsets.
Yeah.
They literally sell products to companies that want them. It's not about ripping people off.
And all sorts, not the big ones you know about. Everybody.
Yeah.
All the little ones.
Yep.
All of those little IoT devices I tinker with, they all got Qualcomm radio.
I can't. This is like the Sonos thing falls into this category. This is a company that makes products. They patent the technologies they make. We can sort of hate that on some level, I guess, but I do think that inventors should be rewarded, and in this case, it's helping them. Look, one of the reasons they can sell 5G chipsets to Apple maybe is they own patents on that stuff, and they don't let other people use them without licensing them. They have the best prices, yada yada yada. I mean, is that wrong? I don't know. Maybe
no, and let's face it, if you kick up enough fuss, you can get the FTC to force them to separate their licensing business from their hardware business.
Yeah, right.
Show the collusion that is a crime, and the FTC can mandate a split. Nobody's even come close.
In the last quarter, their licensing business was $5.4 billion compared to their equipment and services of $27 billion. So you're right. It's it's a fifth.
Well, I mean, I look at it every quarter. I told you it's earnings season.
I mean, you have to look at
one of the companies I look at.
$5 billion. None of us have $5 billion.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, but you could just make it like.
So it's really two companies. I think it is two companies. It's a licensing company, and it's a hardware company.
But by the way, like Sonos in a way, not that Sonos is licensing their, well, but they would. So Sonos makes hardware that they sell directly,
right?
And Sonos also licenses the technology so you can integrate your own products into it, right?
Right.
This to me may be a natural process or a natural thing for a company like this to do.
I do also think that they really want to be another Intel. It's interesting because AMD
they might be bigger than Intel right now. Actually, that's another thing to look at.
Yeah.
NVIDIA is. So, listen, if this works out properly, this being this chipset, they could be Intel in the PC space, right? And Intel actually, much like Microsoft, made some bad bets and moved too slowly in a certain direction. And now the world is running, and they're trying to catch up. And so they have these
they are more like
hybrid designs they're doing. And
NVIDIA in the sense that they're in automotive, they're in they're into Quest headsets, they're in mixed reality, they're in radios, they're in CPUs, they're much more diversified.
This is what Microsoft did with software. So when they used to have a Windows, and then they had multiple Windows to address different markets. There's a Windows for IoT. There's a Windows for this. They do this different type of stuff. And unfortunately for Qualcomm, I don't know. I've seen some high-profile failures there. It's a good idea. It makes sense, right? The chipset you make. Well, there's a great example. I was going to say the chipset you make for a phone doesn't make sense in a watch, right? The chipset you make in a phone also doesn't make sense in a PC. And the first one they made for a PC was a chipset from a phone, and it was horrible.
They're in this process. Cristiano Amon has kind of taken this company that really the bulk of its revenue were from mobile, and said we should diversify, and we're going to diversify because Apple's no longer going to use our chips. Google is no longer using our chips. Samsung still uses Qualcomm chips.
Right,
but they're looking.
The problem. Sorry.
Yeah, you definitely repeated like they're running out of time.
Yeah,
everybody's coming in.
They got to diversify.
Now. They should be way out in the lead.
Yeah,
and they're not.
I got to say though, and I'm listen, begrudgingly or not, I think anyone at any of the chipset makers on the other side of the fence, or any of the software makers on the other side of the fence, meaning Microsoft, Intel, Qualcomm, whoever you want to name, has to both respect and be envious of this thing that Apple's accomplished by making the chipsets and the software, and being so successful at it. It's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, they shouldn't be this good at all of those parts.
Yes, it's kind of insane. Yeah. And then they did the transition to the Mac, which of course is what triggered Windows 11, and that happened after we were trying to move to ARM, but will accelerate this need to be able to meet them not just on like raw capabilities, but does this thing stay alive for 24 hours, or does it still offer the same performance as whatever preceded it? And Apple did it, and we just have not done it anywhere else.
No,
that's a problem.
It's a pretty unique thing, and I was impressed that they got to the second one, and I'm even more stunned to see they're going to make a third.
I think
silicon is hard,
right? And this is the thing with this is the Qualcomm. This is the problem for the Elite X, right? So there is no doubt that this thing, as well as their mobile thing, whatever their what's it called, what's the new one called, 8 Gen 3 or something, whatever it is, will in some ways outperform a comparable Apple silicon chipset. There's no doubt about it. The question is, and it's an impossibility, they will never outperform them across the board. They will never be better generally, right? That's the thing. You could cherry pick this. Like, here's a benchmark we got, we won. That's what they're going to be able to do.
Can they be better than Intel? Might be more relevant, right? No,
But again, no. I mean that broadly, because Intel has first of all, Intel. I mean, they've been the core of this market for decades, but today they have a microprocessor family, differentiated products, different wattages, different chipsets, architectures, and so forth. So yes, could they listen? The first Windows and ARM PC, that little piece of junk running on the Snapdragon 850, I think it was called, or 830, whatever it was, had 24 hours of battery life. Real world, it did. Is that better than Intel? Yeah, in battery life. And everything else, it was worse. So it has to be better at the things that matter, and it can't just be one benchmark or one point. It has to, to be better. Like, in other words, the best thing that this thing could do, the best it could do, would be to be as good as, generally speaking, a U series Intel processor. That's all this thing can do. This processor is not aimed at gaming rigs. It's not aimed at workstations. It's not aimed at the very low end of the market. It's aimed at a very specific part of the market. I would call it the volume part of the market. Smart. Like Richard said, non-technical. Don't worry about developers. Don't worry about technical people. Worry about people. Yeah. And I think they're in the PC space. This is the right place to hit. The problem is, like, freaking Apple came out of the gate with this thing. It was like, but it doesn't have a dedicated GPU. Nobody cares. It was kind of great across the board. It's like, but the RAM is tied to the CPU you buy. Nobody cares. It's hard to find that level of success. It's impossible.